All right, holy shit, what a journey it's been. I mean, how long's the Kirk show been on? A year, little over a year.
Yep.
And you go back and
15 months.
15 months now. So you go back and you listen to some of those early drops. Like during this last break, I went in and I pretty much started at the beginning again. And just like the sound quality, the tone, the pace of the podcast, like Steve hadn't found his voice. It's an entirely different podcast.
Yeah. They had no drops, you know.
Right.
Yeah.
No library. It was all gone.
He didn't have the audio board, so it was
nothing.
Yep.
And then they started finding their way a little bit. And I think there was even an episode. I can't remember. It was right at the end of the Red 13 time frame, or it was right at the beginning of the new studio. And Kirk goes, you know, what I really appreciate about that time is we found out what this podcast is going to be. Like we defined that podcast on the fly.
Right.
And that just jumped out at me because you start to truly see over the course of time, the thing evolve, change, really go with the flow and start to become a more viable, I guess viable's not the right word, but tangible entity that you can describe and listen to, I guess you can describe. But what do you guys think? Let's chat.
Yeah, I think that it's very. We were talking about it off air. It's very similar to sort of what Kirk has gone through, right? You know, the Grateful Dead started their sort of thing. Only three of them knew each other. Bobby and Jerry were hanging out. They had these other friends. They were doing some jug band stuff and knocking around San Francisco. Like Kirk was just doing interviews with the Boston guys and finding their way until they finally sort of latched on, got a little bit bigger, got a little bit better promotion through the Barstool gang, and next thing you know, we're off and running with the Miniverse
to the races.
Yeah. Well, I think too that the best thing for Kirk, it's been a rough road, but the best thing for Kirk was getting onto Barstool, which I think was in the back pocket like the whole time, going back to his EEI days, because of his rapport with Portnoy, especially when they got together at like the Super Bowl or when they had him on. But yeah, that pre KMS show era of Kirk doing the Snapchats or the drops, periscopes when he was still with Entercom but not on his own yet. You can see there was a bridge there between what he had done before, which was him trying to drag a tired and old format into something new and more relevant. And of course more dangerous because he was hitting all the hot topics. And then once he got his own, and just the whole, what was it, in Saxonville, right? Red 13 Studios were out in like Framingham.
Mm-hmm.
And so he had that area, and that was always an interesting discussion on, because they all live in like Winchester and towards the city. They all had to drive out to like, I take Route 9 out to like Saxonville.
Mike was spending $30 an Uber each way.
The God Patrol socks.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
But
that's right.
It's funny. It's just like it's a lot. It's very similar to the beginning of the Dead. With those guys were kind of playing an old, archaic brand of music. With Pigpen as their leader, they were playing a really super duper blues based kind of stuff, and it wasn't good. And Jerry didn't have any sort of space to kind of freewheel and do that stuff that he liked to do. And it's like Kirk back on Kirk and Callahan, right? He didn't have, or Dennis and Callahan, and even that didn't really have that space to kind of do what he was doing. He was dragging these guys along because he liked Jerry at that time, and they were friends. And Jerry Garcia was friends with Pigpen, and he started the band. And you got to keep these guys happy, but you know that the bus was just sort of leaving them behind.
That's right. That's right. So.
Flying down deserted streets, wrapped in mother's wine and sheets, asbestos boots on flaming feet, dreaming of forbidden trees, wearing uniforms on nighttime beats. Ask me where I'm going and what I eat. I answer them with a voice so sweet. I can't come down, it's plain to see. I can't come down, I've been set free. Who you are and what you do don't make no difference to me.
So yeah, that's really what we're going to talk about today is the similarities of the different eras between the two groups, right? Between Kirk and what he's done with the show from his time at EEI into his personal podcast, through radio.com and then into the Barstool Barstool world, and then we're going to compare that really with the Dead and kind of how they got their feet wet and they started up and sort of the different eras. So I know there's some folks who are big time Dead heads, have been around for a while. Probably everybody who's listening is a Minihane. So I think probably, you know, let's bang off the Minihane stuff first, right? And then we'll kind of dig probably a little bit deeper on the Grateful Dead, just to provide some context here. But the way I think really the major Kirk eras, you have like the straight up sports guy, right? When he first got started, you hear clips from time to time.
And that was him like doing anything he could do just to get on the radio.
Right. Yeah, and even when he plays those clips, right? And he's like like that Brock Holt call on the prank call last week, right?
Right.
And then you've got the morning show, and then really coming over to Barstool. But let's talk about it a little bit. Merch, where do you sort of define the different lines of sort of the eras personally?
Yeah, I mean, you definitely had the weekend fill-in guy, right? And he was just, it is so funny to hear those old clips because he is just playing a role at that point. You know, he's doing whatever he can do to keep showing up on the radio and keep getting on there. And that's, you know, that's your Warlocks pre-Grateful Dead era. And then he's got the Enough About Me thing where he's starting to figure out a thing that he likes to do. He's got his own thing. He doesn't have anybody sort of holding him back except maybe the people that are writing the checks for him.
And his co-host.
That small thing.
Yeah. And then finally he hops on the Barstool bus, you know, and that was like, you know, when the Dead kind of got into the Ken Kesey and the Neil Cassidy world, and it was just, they took off at that point.
Yeah.
They started selling out shows, Kirk's doing sellouts. They started touring around the world. Kirk's going to different states and wowing people all over the place.
Yeah.
You remember he did that. I remember they were talking about it on the old DEI show when Enough About Me first came out. And I don't remember the full context of it, but I remember them flying him down to Texas or something to do a talk about like how to launch a successful podcast.
Right.
And it's just amazing to look at now because it's like now he got that experience, right? And he was able to take that and personally grow through that. And we all benefit, right?
Well, he saw it before. I think a lot of people did, certainly before I did, the connection between amplifying your voice through the traditional medium of radio and then a podcast, right?
Yeah.
So he was just I think Dino had already left, I think, and he started Enough About Me. And you know, right after the show, he would do an hour podcast, go to a different studio, and he would do a quick 1 hour show with Curtis and Ken as his producers, and he would bring in guests. It was strictly a interview style podcast. And of course, Jerry just didn't get it, right?
Yeah.
Jerry couldn't wrap his brain around it. And even by the way, I'll say I couldn't either because it was like, well, he's already got a radio show. Why is he doing a podcast? And at that point, I had not been listening to podcasts. It was on the EEI app,
right?
So then but from there, I said like, well, what is this podcast app on my phone? You know, you start like, and you start listening to like, and I'm a history guy. I love history stuff, and I found all these great things to listen to. And gradually, the radio turned off. Except for his show, except for 4 hours a day. That was it. There was no more Holly and you know, Dale and Holly. There was no more, you know, afternoon show. I just listened to podcasts and you know, Kirk's show in the morning. And then eventually he made the full leap. And they tried to set him up at Entercom, which of course was just a red herring, right? They just wanted to, you know, bench him for a couple of years. Exactly.
Yep.
Put him in a box, keep him quiet, pay him his salary, which is so stupid on so many even business levels.
Could you imagine like looking at him now, looking at us, the Minifans and his Twitter following and getting people trending and being the jackass who was like, yeah, we need to bench that guy and put him on, and to still have a job
and pay him. I know, and pay him a lot of money, right? I mean, if I was overseeing that, I'd be like, okay, let's just cut ties, pay him out.
Yeah.
Pay him out, but let's move on. Instead, they're like, no, we'll pay your full salary for it was like 2.5 years or something for his contract at that point.
Yeah.
He'd still be under contract now. Let's put it that way.
Crazy.
So stupid.
But it was funny. I mean, he had that vision and he knew that the podcast was the way to go, you know, and it's like, again, we'll go back to, cause this is what the show's doing. The Grateful Dead, you know, they grew up in a world where it was about selling singles. You know, you gotta have a hit record, gotta have a hit record. And they were like, no, we're just going to play live and we're going to play live 200 nights a year. And we're going to make our own universe, and then they're going to travel around with us, and they're going to do what we do, and they're going to listen to what we tell them to listen to.
That's right.
They're going to make prank calls, and they're going to make parodies. Oh no, wait a minute, that's us.
They call them covers. The Dead calls them covers.
Yeah, there you go.
So
the Dead do covers, and we do parody songs.
So then we know Kirk gets his own show, and he starts his own. He gets hired by Barstool, and within what, a week he was up and running, or maybe it was 2 weeks.
Yeah.
From the time he announced that he's signing with Barstool to his first show, I think was 2 weeks, like the end of May into like June 15th or June 17th,
Yeah,
whatever it was.
I've talked about it a couple of times. And I mean, he and Steve were out doing stuff before they were on the air. They were collecting the sound at the Gay Pride Parade, or the Straight Pride Parade.
Straight Pride.
Making prank phone calls.
Yeah.
Yep, calling mayors. Oh yeah,
that's right.
Yep. So then he pulls into he gets a spot in and I guess it's out of his pocket, right? The studio, the Red 13 Studios in Saxonville. Mm-hmm. And there is, and I've had to go back because people, not just us, but I've heard other people say, boy, the sound was so much better now than it was then. But I didn't really notice it then until I went back.
Isn't that crazy? Yeah.
When Kirk was on his break, I did the same thing you guys all did. I went back to like day 1, episode 1, and I started listening again. And you do hear a different sound quality.
Yeah, I noticed in the car because I got to turn my thing up to like 25 on the so I can hear it. It's only like 15 or 16 now that they're at the new place.
Yeah. Well, it's funny too. I think it was right when Kirk went on his break, this most recent one. I listened to that Jerry podcast because you saw the tweets going out. He really talks about Kirk and kind of the whole situation. And I can't remember, it was that one or maybe right after, but he had Shattuck on. And Shattuck made this comment where he's like, the Minifans have plenty of Kirk canon to go back and re-listen to and really, and it's just like listening to old tapes, right?
Good
and like
description.
going back, or, it's
perfect. Yeah, I've gone through the whole thing twice, I think now. And
oh wow,
that's impressive.
Yeah, but one of the things that jumped out of my mind was Mike's levels were so loud that I'd have to actually
notice that. I got to go back and check that.
I'm not sure if it was his voice is just louder, and it is. He has a very strong voice, but it was just louder. And I even like sent Steve messages like, "Are Mike's levels too high?" And he never responded. But it was just like, that seems odd. Since the move to the new studios, where they are now in Cambridge, right? Yeah, it's much more balanced. It's
they got their wall of sound now.
They got the wall.
There you go.
Of course, no security, but they have the wall.
But they need some Hell's Angels to come and watch.
Yes.
So let's sort of switch it a little bit here. We'll talk a little bit about the Dead. So I know that obviously probably everybody who's listening is a Minifan. When we start to think about the Dead, I know Merch, you talked about a couple of the eras. Ned, you talked about a couple of them. Personally, for me, you kind of have this pre-69 sort of era where they're, to your point, Merch, kind of figuring things out. They're kind of into the acid tests, and there's a great story. I think it was on that Amazon special that came out, and they're like, yeah, we just got the band together and we couldn't get a gig, so we're playing strip clubs basically. And they're playing like 17-minute songs for like, could you imagine? So you kind of go to that, and then I have sort of like when Pigpen really starts and he comes out in front, and it's really like a blues band, and you get really those big Pigpen just boom ballad sort of songs. And then for me, I'll throw out really 3 more cuts. So you've got like the early 70s, sort of, I put like 71 to 74, I kind of put in its own category. So you have a little of the tail end of Pigpen, and then you have Keith coming on. You got sort of the introduction to Donna, but you still kind of have that bluesy sort of bass. And then I think you get into post hiatus. So for those who don't know, the band went on hiatus in 75 that didn't put out much music. And then when they came back, they had a whole bunch of new material. And that's when you really get into Jerry with the envelope filter and the Butron, a bunch of new effects. Kind of, we'll talk about that. I'll let you guys talk. And then I think after that, you sort of get into the Brent era, which is sort of the whole, I know that I'm not huge on the Brent era. I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I know that
it is a source. It is a source of discussion in the Grateful Dead world. Get into big wars over Keith or Brent.
Yeah. So those for me, I'd say those are the major eras. Let's go the other way here, Ned. I don't I don't know if you have a specific cutoff or what are your thoughts on
it? The first era, of course, was the acid test, and Jerry has said in many interviews throughout the life of the Dead that the acid tests were a great training ground because they could play or they could not play. People were there to partake in Ken Kesey's acid tests around San Francisco in '66. They weren't there to see the Grateful Dead.
Yep.
So the Grateful Dead just provided like a loose soundtrack so they could play or they could not play. Now, the fact that they were tripping their brains out also worked in their favor because they could try something, and if it didn't work, they could just stop.
Right, because they could play well or they could play poorly, right? It didn't really matter.
Correct.
Everybody was just there, just being right together.
And as you said, General, with Pigpen's rhythm and blues background and his blues voice, and he could sing. He had a really good voice, but he didn't take acid. He liked to drink.
Yeah.
And of course, that ended up really hitting him hard, and he died very early, very young from cirrhosis of the liver. But so he wasn't fully into it like the rest of the guys were, but he was there from the beginning, and he was a good keyboardist. So
I've been balling a shiny black steel jackhammer, been chipping up rocks for the great highway. I live 5 years if I take my time, balling that jack and drinking my wine. I've been chipping them rocks from dawn till doom, while my rider hide my bottle in the other room.
good keyboardist. So they often had a backup keyboardist as well, Tom Contanton, who ended up and he was fantastic, but he also didn't do a lot of LSD. And he ended up I think they mutually parted. But he was fantastic as like a secondary keyboardist to Pigpen. And then once Pigpen's health started to slip in like 71, 72, he dies in 73, but Keith and Donna came on and filled that void, with Keith being a traditional, more Steinway piano player. Not much of an organ. There was a distinct organ sound early on in the early Dead, in that rough early Dead, and it's a great sound, right? But then Keith was purely a piano guy, and so that era lasted until 79, right? And then Keith and Donna were asked to leave because I think of some tensions in the band and also some of their drug use. And then they brought in Bobby and the Midnights, or one of Bobby's keyboardists, Brent Milan, who was strictly an electronic keyboard player. He could play the piano or organ and different sounds. It was a change. I didn't really care for his voice, but he also, I know, but his voice was important because Jerry's voice began to fail.
Yeah.
So he began to support Jerry, in singing the songs that Jerry traditionally sang by himself.
Right.
So Brent was definitely needed.
For the non-deadheads that are watching, a lot of deadheads will break it up like cut and dry by keyboardists.
Yeah,
you have the three main eras, right?
Yeah.
You kind of break
1990 was the last era with Vince, and
Vince too. Yep, correct. Yep. And I actually saw them with Bruce Hornsby. I was lucky because Bruce Hornsby said in one of the shows in the late 80s, early 90s. So I got to see Bruce Hornsby, and that was actually better than. It was after Brent. It was actually better than Brent's shows, I thought. Only because
it was too
Bruce
bad.
Hornsby was really good.
When Brent died, and he was like, "Yeah, sorry." He was pretty big at that point. He was like, "I'm playing with you guys from time to time, but I'm not joining the Grateful Dead." Yeah. I look at the eras really for me as like the 65 to 67 is its own sort of little beast, right? Like it was almost all blues. It was really Pigpen driven. And then the 67 to about 70 were the psychedelic.
Let me throw this in here too, just for people who aren't deadheads. On the road, any sort of, Ken Kesey, you already brought him up, but the Dead and Jerry and sort of that general acid scene and the Bay Area in the late 60s had a huge impact by this guy, Neil Cassidy, who hung with all those, the aforementioned people. And I think that's a huge part of, you listen to any Jerry interviews talking about Neil Cassidy and how important he was, and Kerouac. And he's really like this, almost like this godly sort of figure, right? That just like anybody he touched, like, was elevated somehow. I don't know what it is, but
that is how they talk about him. For sure.
It's just this crazy thing.
And the book On the Road by Jack Kerouac, Dean Moriarty is based on
Neil.
That's right.
Neil Cassidy.
So sorry, I didn't mean to jump in, Merch. But.
My favorite era. I mean, you guys broke down the eras as the way that this is supposed to go. My favorite era really was the 71 to 74 era at the time, and it was a shame that Mickey left the band because of the BS with his father and the accounting stuff. But
Mickey was a drummer, one of the drummers.
I adore the one drummer at Grateful Dead.
Yeah.
Billy is such a good drummer, and they get away from that. Yes. Plodding, and I love that stuff. It was a unique thing, but I was a big one drummer fan.
Well, it was a huge distinction because Billy was a drummer at high school band, and then he was like more of a jazz drummer when he went off to college. Mickey was a pure percussionist. Mickey likes rhythms, beats, global sounds. He does bring a unique, aspect to it. Of course, drums and spaces, we all know it's when we all go get a beer, right? But I do really appreciate it. But yes, especially if you look at the Veneta, Oregon show from August 27th, 1972 at the Renaissance Fairgrounds, there's only one drummer, and it's now, I mean, like you tell anyone, picking your favorite Dead ear is like picking your favorite kids. It's really, it changes, and you really can't.
Which one's being a shithead? Yeah.
Right now, my favorite show is it's packaged up as Sunshine Daydream, and it's
I've got that DVD.
And it's also on YouTube. It's the dancing naked pole guy.
Yeah.
For those of you who see it on YouTube, but it's just Billy, and it's such a fantastic sound, with just him.
Crisper, they can make quicker turns, quicker changes. Yeah.
See, for me, I like the extended catalog that you get into the late 70s, 77 post hiatus. I love when you hear that, estimated profit when they come out. They got that weird, like, what is it, Merch Sevens, or the weird time they got on the song, and you get kind of Bobby in the background on the reggae style kind of rhythm guitar, and Jerry up top, and for me, it's like that period of time, they're clean. They kind of figure things out. Like, it's tight. Like, it's good. It's the right level of experimental, because I feel like you can get kind of lost, especially in like late 60s, early 70s. Like, you can kind of get lost in some of the dark stars, and it's like, holy crap, like, where are we going here? But then they tightened it up a little bit, so it's a little cleaner. But you're not quite to that 70. So when you get to 78, they go the other way, right? Because I think, like, I read when they went and did their Egypt tour was when they started getting into heroin and stuff, and started going that route. So then you can hear it in the music where it's going this whole other direction.
Oh yeah, you can definitely tell. You can definitely tell the cocaine years versus the heroin years.
Exactly.
The pace of the songs.
Mercy, I was going to say, you can tell from the songs, the cocaine. But wait a minute, why are they playing this so goddamn fast?
Exactly.
But that was one of the in the era of the transition era, because and I talk about the pre-74, you can lump it all together if you wanted to, but there were like little micro eras within there too. So you had Augustus Stanley Owsley Bear, who was there, not only the greatest LSD creator ever, but he was also a phenomenal genius when it came to audio sound. And he built their wall of sound. And you can you can Google the pictures. There's two walls of sound. You got to be careful, because there's Phil Spector's wall of sound, which was a session studio in Los Angeles. But the wall of sound that was built by Bear was literally a wall of sound, 35 speakers stacked on top of each other, 3 stories tall. Phil Lesh could project his bass out the entire length of a football field, and actually even further before the sound would disintegrate. So it was really a phenomenal era, but it was so time consuming, a bit costly, but more time consuming, setting it up, breaking it down, loading it up, driving to the next night, unloading it, breaking it down, building it up. It was exhausting. But you can tell these guys, and they talk about it was like 74 when it kind of went from LSD to Coke, and they were taking the Coke, but the roadies had the Coke because they needed the energy to keep going and doing all this shit, right? Yeah.
Because then they drifted into sort of disco stuff, right? Like with during the cocaine era there, because they did the Shakedown Street album and then Go to Heaven. I mean, there's a lot of disco influences in that.
Well, and then when you start listening to the Bobby stuff in the late '80s, when he's like, there's some YouTube videos, he's like climbing the racks and weird echoes and shit, and he's just like screwing around.
Well, Shakedown Street is I always, when I first heard it, I'm like, ooh, the Dead Do Disco. And then, Shakedown Street was produced by one of my favorites, Lowell George of Little Feat.
Oh yeah.
Oh, and I love Little Feat is one of my favorites. And they don't consider it very successful, I guess, in the canon of the Dead. It doesn't rank as high as others. But now that I know where it's coming from, like from Lowell George, I kind of like the music on there better. So of course, playing it live is they're much better live than on the album, of course. So
you're from northern New England. Were you up here I know you had already moved to Florida, but did you come back for the Oxford shows?
I missed them because we'd go up in the summer.
Open for them.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
With Lowell George?
No,
he made like 1980.
He was gone by that point.
He was gone by that point. Yeah. But so you can define those eras too. Of like, and even we'll talk about micro eras. People even go down to the tour. What tour was better?
Yeah.
Spring of '77 is legendary, right? And I went through that whole thing. Fun fact, Mrs. Snark went to the May 7th, 1977 show, which is by the way, Dick's pick number 4.
Oh,
nice.
Yeah. One of the legends.
Very nice.
And very quick story. I was a baby. I was a child. I was still at my mother's bosom at that age. So I didn't go. I didn't know her then. But she was discussing it with her best friend not even a year ago. And they said, like, you don't remember we were at that show. And my wife said, and her friend said, I don't remember being at that show. He goes, no, we were at that show. It was fantastic. Remember he started describing, she's like, I have no recollection. It must not have been a very good show. And her husband says, Gail, Dick's Picks number 4 is that show. That means he thought it was the 4th best show.
One of the 2 or 3 greats in the pantheon, right?
Yes. Yeah. And I remember because my wife said, she told me about the show. She goes, well, one time I saw the show, they opened with like, my Fanukani, the Italian, because my wife's Italian. Nice. And I'm like, they did what? I've never heard him do that, right? I've heard him do other little ditties between songs. And then sure enough, when it came out, there it is. The opening is Fanukani, da 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 da.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
So eras.
Yeah, so I think it's sort of let's go through, I guess, and sort of compare and put them together. So I think what's that?
Like, where are we now? Where is Kirk now in the Grateful Dead eras? Right? Is he?
Well, that's what
I'm giving where I would put him right now. Put the gang and everybody. I'd put him at that wall of sound thing. Would sound good. Steve's got the soundboard now, and he's got the drops, and they've got their audio all dialed in, and they're really cooking on all cylinders. I mean, these last 2 weeks since they came back have been 4 or 5 of the I've heard.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
And they dove right into it too. I think you're right? They sort of figured out the experimental stuff, like the early 60s acid phase, kind of they worked through that, We talked on the pre-call even about some of the prank call era, the parody song era, which are still ongoing, right? Just like in the Dead, you sort of had this one thing that would sort of consume the band for a little while. It would never really go away. You'd always hear it. Yeah. But it wasn't the sole focus anymore.
Right. Then it'll come back. You're like, ooh, they did like
it's that. Yeah.
And be like, hey, Carano wrote another parody song. All right.
Correct.
I forgot how much I like this song. Yeah.
Correct. And like they did with the people coming and going into the band, you do have that, you've got DEC and you've got Matt Carano stepping in when Steve goes out, like when Steve had to go to Madawaska early. Those are 2 fantastic shows. When Steve had to cut out, if you guys remember, he had to go up early, right? To set it all up. And he did a great job.
Yeah.
But first it was Carano came in on like the Thursday, and then DEC and Carano came in on Friday because Mike had to go.
Sat there and did nothing though that day.
Those were two great shows.
They were funny, but DEC did just sit there in sort of stunned silence, I think, the whole time. And then what's going on? Yeah, so you got the sit-in people, right? Culinary can be like TC, and
Culinane's an era unto himself. Absolutely.
Way of getting is always Dave. Gets right in the way. Steve, when the boys are getting into a spirited movie debate, fuck it up.
Step all over.
Yeah, fuck it up with something that makes no sense. Try and prove yourself, but yet prove nothing. Let's just, how much? We're going another hour. This I can go. I mean, I'll do this all day. I'll do this all day.
All right.
What's your favorite movie, Dave?
My favorite movie of all time?
Yes, that's right.
Ooh, tough one.
Another thing, Steve, is
Gladiator.
Repeat the question.
Wayne's World.
Real quick, Steve. Repeat the question to buy yourself some time.
It seamlessly buys you time without no one notices that that's what you're doing.
I call it a tired but true move. It never fails. You think I care what the answer is, Dave?
No.
Okay. Gladiator.
Because we do have, if you look at if the Culinary Era was really a tour, we'll say, because it was only for a month, 3 weeks while Steve was gone. Yeah. So we'll consider that like a tour, the Culinary tour. They had one of the greatest shows. They had the
Cesky Vaz, the interim producer, is one of the great shows.
What is one of the best?
It's
to me, it's Scarlet Begonias and Fire on the Mountain from May 8th, 1977. Right? Yeah.
I agree. If I've listened to everything and he's done, or if it's a weekend or something, I just need something. I'm like, I'm listening to that, and I just laugh and laugh.
Every time I hear it.
Take time.
So things take time. So an underrated show, I think, or Kirk show is right before they went on the 4th of July last year. And remember, they like pre-recorded that week.
Oh yeah.
And they went through like the Esquire top 10 podcasts or something.
Yeah.
And they just ripped the shit out of them. And that's when Mike is going off like they can't sell out a Buffalo Wild Wings.
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that?
Right.
They're going off and they're doing that, they're pretending they come out. Like, I laughed so hard in that show. It was great.
And then, of course, the follow-up to that was the post July 4th when they came back, and you had the Mark Moroso 9 o'clock 4th of July night drunken phone call, which was also, comparing him to Liberace, and I was like, oh my god.
Oh yeah, that's right, his little buddy there. Yeah, that movie. You ever see that movie?
It's like, I mean, I'm not saying it's anything like that, but so funny. Yeah. But the Culinary Era, those 3 weeks were great, and they even harkened back to it much later on with Murchison's Mouse is his nickname because of Bobby Two Clicks, of him clicking and recording. And it turns out he never recorded anything that was said during the Culinary Era. He's a Culinary guy. That discovery was hysterical. Yeah. Hysterical. For sure. And Dave still has gone on to have a really good career, and I watch his show every morning at 6 a.m. It's a lot of fun. If you guys are awake, you should watch it as well. It's great. And he's still in the orbit. He's not going to really be able to leave the orbit of the Minihane universe, right?
No, he likes it too much.
Yeah. So we've got. I mean, you can talk about his political talk, and I don't mean his political talk, but like him going after Murchison, or Murchison going after him, or Shirley, or things like that. Those are kind of like the reoccurring songs. Like, do you guys recall in the late 70s they used to go to shows and have signs like, it's been 900 shows since we've heard St. Stephen, right? They'd be outside. So we haven't heard from Kevin Cullen since Kirk did his show, right?
There you go. Yeah.
So it's been, and that also is another one that also like a fantastic show. And I love the fact that some people didn't like it. I thought it was great. Yeah. I loved it. I thought it was brilliantly done.
Me too.
I'm waiting for another one actually, because I know it was a lot of work into that, right? But that was really, really, really well done. And then he wrote it, and Steve produced it, and we put it all together. I think I was even a voice on there.
Yeah, me too.
So it was great. It was, and I'd love to see more
Hammer too. I mean, all that experimental stuff that they get into, where it's like, it's just pure creativity, like out there to take in and behold. It's
absolutely
fantastic.
Right, and the fact that you get more, that there are people don't really leave, but they just go to the background for a while, and then you have new people come in. So now you get Visionless Dave and Ziggy Robinson. This is got to be their era, right? The past 2 weeks, they are first of all, they're great guys.
Mayo and Menners are gone, and we got
Mayo's been gone, right? And Menners has stepped away. He'll be back. But now you got VD and Ziggy, and their interplay with both Mike and Steve, because they both love Kirk, but one likes Steve, and one doesn't like Steve, and one likes Mike, and one doesn't like Mike, and the interplay is fantastic. So we're out into another, jam where it's like this is something else that's excellent, right?
Yeah.
It's fantastic. I love it.
And
So
you get
far, he hasn't missed,
I know it's great.
right? He hasn't missed.
What are the
I
odds?
mean, the
It's like
trolls
he
will
knows what
say,
he's doing or something.
Couple shows
yeah, it's almost like he knows what he's doing.
Like he's got talent or something. Well, and I think too, from a technical perspective, technology, you look at Steve and we were talking, I think it was before we got into the record, but Steve's soundboard and just how it's come out. And I think there was, there was a certain point I remember where he was playing Mike's mom and Marjorie Egan with their orgasm sounds. And I just remember
and Jim Brody.
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh
and Kirk
God.
was sitting back there and he's just like, yes, Steve, yes. Like you could hear him. He's literally saying that. Like his mastermind has just like finally gotten molded the play to the way that he wanted it.
Sort of like leaning back and being like, damn,
I did it.
bombed,
You've done it.
Well, that was the one thing when the show first started and came back. We didn't know Steve, and we kind of knew Mike, but we didn't really know Steve. I thought naively that he'd have a ton of drops that they would have taken from EEI. Of course, that was never going to happen, right? So Ken Laird was brilliant at it, but he had a whole library to pull from, and he started recording as well. And also, Kirk was saying put in more drops, right? So it's just taken Steve time, but now that he's got a pretty good library of drop, the what's crack me up every time.
Oh, I know.
The what? I mean, and he keeps adding to him and building on those. So like he's up to like I think 12 what's, which is hysterical.
All right,
and
so
of course the Jerry drop.
This episode with a singular recommendation, so we ended with an album recommendation. That was one of the requests we got in the DMs from some of the Minifans out there. They thought it'd be a good idea if we could come up with a song, to put somebody in the right direction. And then when we talked about it offline, we were saying we could pick a song for the country fans and pick a song for the rock and roll fans. You want to pick one tonight, Ned?
Okay.
Tonight for the country fans, Ned.
Country fans, I'm going to go straight away. My number one favorite right now. And like I said, they're all favorites. You've got, by the way, you also have the country and Western. The Dead do both. Both genres,
both kinds of music.
And Bobby's Western songs where Jack Straw and Me and My Uncle are perennial favorites. But I'm going through the area with I'm going to go tonight with a suggestion of Merle Haggard, Sing Me Back Home.
Oh, all right.
Sing Me Back Home is a great cover. They do a fantastic version. It's on that show and from the Renaissance Fair in Veneta, Oregon. It's a great version. It's a really good song.
Like it. All right, see you next week.
I have to say, I gave this is not a biased audience. I'll ask you guys, how great have I been so far tonight? I'll ask you guys.
That seemed weak.
I'll ask you guys, how great have I been tonight? So before the show started, and I am dead serious about this, I'll say it again. I said it 10 or 15 minutes ago. There is no fan base like this ever. Even the ones I hate here, I love. I love you guys so much. You are unbelievable. So I'll kiss your ass for a second. No.